This is a continuation, part cassette A, side 2 of Ingrid Shutkin. Okay. We were talking about your aunt.
Yes, my Aunt Sophie from Riga.
Yes.
Yeah.
So can we go back to the part where you were saying about her jewelry?
Yes.
Sorry.
She was, now my grandmother was always very little jewelry, you know. And here comes my Aunt Sophie with necklaces and a brooch and rings and bracelets, never earrings. And I realized that many, many years later, my Aunt Sophie never wore earrings. And my sister is the same way. She cannot stand to have her ears pierced, you know. So it's in the genes. Anyway, so, but then she would come and she would stay a little while and then she would leave. But then when my grandfather died in 1939, she came and they left right away the next day. And it seemed, I can't really remember the year, but it must have been like 1942 or so. My father went to Riga. And when he came back, there was whispering and great crying. And what I heard from little snippets of conversation, they were gone. Most likely they were shot. And it just was very, I couldn't figure these things out. I was a little girl, what did I know? And so I thought that was, very strange, or it was emotional, very emotional, but I couldn't figure out why at that point. And then when my grandfather died, I was very, very attached to him. And he called me Putti, which is, the little angel in Italian, the little angels. So anyway, when he died, one day I heard my grandmother say to my aunt, it was good that he died. And I carried such a grudge against her because of that for years. And it must have been in the 1950s, before I came over here. My aunt was in East Germany, and she came over before I left. And I said to her, that Oma said that it was good that he died. I just has been aggravating me all these years. And my aunt looked at me, and she said, because what would have happened to him, they would have gotten to him. Then I realized. And there was another cousin that we had, a cousin Ruth, and it was my father's cousin, Aunt Silly, and her daughter Ruth. And for some reason, all of a sudden, Ruth was not in school anymore. And for about, I don't know, maybe 3-4 months, I had to take my homework, and my grandmother and I would go to their house. They had a little apartment somewhere in the back, and we would go in the evening at night, and I would talk to her about my schoolwork and what we learned in school. And then all of a sudden, we didn't do that anymore. They weren't there anymore. So I don't know.
What explanation was given?
Well, she was Jewish.
Yeah. Did you know that? Did you understand that?
Yes. I really knew, but we never talked about it. There were a lot of things that were never, I can't remember anyone ever saying, don't say that or don't tell. But it was just sort of understood that there were things in the family that were talked in the family, but nothing outside the family, ever. And that's the way I grew up. just, my grandmother used to listen to BBC, which carried the death penalty, and she was found out. And I would never tell anyone that's what she did. And, that talked about what was really happening, I guess.
So you were banned from listening to BBC?
Oh, yes.
And what else
Of
was
course.
you banned from listening?
Of course. You couldn't, no. You couldn't listen, you only listened to German radio stations. Oh, no, that was a big no-no.
What else were you not allowed to do? Like books?
Oh, yeah. That was very regulated, sure. You couldn't buy, books that were forbidden. No.
How about music?
No, that was only, German composers and German music. Nothing like that. I tell you, the first time I heard American music was in 1946. It's funny. Glenn Miller, In the Mood. I thought this was fantastic. I just, sounded so good and different. Yeah.
How would you describe the German music to be?
Very, upbeat, uplifting, romantic. We had very many romantic folk songs, and in our house there were a lot of opera arias and a lot of singing. As I grew up, we had a lot of family parties and lots of singing and lots of music. Much music.
Were you a member of any youth group? Well,
yes, you had to.
Okay.
You had to. If you went into higher education, you had to join the, it was part of the Hitler Youth, but it was called Young. Huh? Bunddeutscher Mädchen. That was after. I didn't get into that because that was when you were 14.
Yeah.
But from 10 to 14, young girls, Jungmädchen, was the group. That yes,
and you were
I had
part
to.
of that?
Oh, sure, you had
what
to.
What were the activities you guys did? Dance or
Yeah, and plays and music. We sang chorus, and at one time we went to the hospitals, to the veterans, where the wounded soldiers were. We had a big wounded soldiers hospital there, and we went to those there, and we would sing in the hallways, and we would put on plays. We would learn with the little saws, to make little toys for children for Christmas and things of that sort.
Was this organized through a school or?
No, it was
Through the
well.
government,
It
or
was the government.
school?
The government was everywhere.
Okay.
School, everywhere
And your
was
church
part
too?
of the. Yes. The church, the Lutheran church, was. In a way independent, but yet they were controlled.
Were they accepted, your religion, Lutheran?
Sure, was
Accepted?
yeah.
By the Nazi?
That was
Was the
yeah.
Nazi
Well,
government?
no religion was really accepted. It was not encouraged. But since they were really, you think, in a regime for 12 years, they really didn't have the time that like the communists did, because they were in, for so long, they could discourage the church much more than the Nazis. They didn't have the time. And so they discouraged it, actively. They would plan, my grandmother always said that she found that outrageous, they would plan activities for right during the church service, see. So you had to go to their Jungmädchen activities, and it was like Sunday mornings. We would go to the hospitals to sing for the wounded soldiers.
And
So-
how do you remember your feeling there? Like, you were a child, but
Yeah.
what did you understand from that? Do you remember?
I remember that, it was, I was not supposed to be, it was very much discouraged at home to look for Hitler as the person,
At home, it was.
at home. Yes. Yes. We didn't even have a picture.
How about
of
your
it.
community as a whole? What do you remember? How did they feel? Well, what was the main feeling or the sense that you got from your community?
I think there were a lot of people that had been um, really in very bad shape when Hitler came to power. And they were glad they had jobs. They were glad they could feed the family. They were glad to have housing, because I think it was very bad with the housing before that. And they had, so, they were, a human being wants to have a life, And so, it was, they made, everyone had a warm place to live. Everyone had a job. Everyone had food on the table, until the war started. And this is in my area.
Yes, yes.
In other parts of Germany, it may have been different. But people were satisfied. They could live, which was before that, I guess.
Now-
Light is on.
Oh, good. We will take a pause. The electricity went out, so now I'm going to plug in the cord. Testing 1, 2, 3. The electricity is back on. Okay. So we were about community, and just go on what you were
Yeah. I don't know, what was I saying? I don't know
About
what.
the community, people
Yes.
had food.
How? Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. And so, everything, when we had theater, we used to go. I mean, the town was between 80,000 and 100,000 people, yet we had a theater and we had very good community life.
Now, before we move on to, we're going to move on to the war now, but what were your parents doing before the war? Was your dad, what was his job? Or
My dad had a car. He sold cars. He had a little car agency. He had a garage, and he had taxis, which he rented out. So
and your mom? Did she work or did she
my mother was home until I think it was about 1943 or so. Hitler declared a total war, some such thing, and all the women had to go to work because there weren't any men left. Everyone was drafted, so the women had to go to work.
Your dad was not drafted, was he?
No, my dad was very clever. He avoided the draft, and so did my uncle.
How did they do that?
My uncle had a distillery, and there was gold. And he joined the city police. My father joined the city police department as a driver and as a because he couldn't sell any more cars, and all of that was gone, and as a driver and to drive people around. And he drove the siren, the car with the siren in the city when there was alarm, sirens were going. And so he was not drafted until 1944. Then he couldn't avoid it anymore. Then he was drafted. And my uncle joined the fire department. And then in 44, he was put in uniform too.
For the German side.
Oh, of
Because
course.
By then,
Of course.
By 1944, the Russians had come in, right?
No,
Not to your side?
no, they didn't come in. They came in 1944, but not in the spring.
Okay.
No, they didn't. They came very close, but that was in 1940 later. You see, during that time, every day was something different. It wasn't, the day didn't go. Every day things changed, and it was very rapidly that events happened. But then by 1944, my father was put in a uniform, and so was my uncle. But that was on my father's side, but I had the relatives, all my mother's relatives and my uncle and so on had been drafted. So they were all in the army.
Did you talk to them while they were in the army?
Oh, sure. Yes.
How did you get any perspectives from them about them fighting a war? Or were they not allowed allowed to talk about what?
You know, they couldn't talk that much.
Did you
No,
talk
I
to them?
would,
Did
no.
you see them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, when they came on furlough. And then one by one they were killed, you know. Um, you heard, you know, then my mother's brother, one was killed. One was a seaman, a merchant marine, and he had gotten into a storm off the coast of England, must have been 1939 or 1940. And he lost some fingers in this storm, and the captain went down with the ship, and these sailors were interned in England all those years, so he survived. He survived the war in an internment camp in England. That saved his life. And then my mother's other brother was very interesting. He, my Uncle Heinrich, he was in the police department in Tilsit when Hitler came to power. And I think it must have been about 34 or 35. He was a religious man, and he said he couldn't, with his conscience, be in the police department with stuff that was going on. So he resigned from the police department. And he was blacklisted. He didn't get another job. He lived then with his in-laws, my aunt and my uncle, lived with the in-laws upstairs. They had a little grocery store, and so they lived upstairs, and he helped with the grocery store. And of course, when the war started, I think 39 or end of 39 or 40, whatever, he was drafted immediately, and he was wounded twice in Russia, and came home, was just light wounds. And the third time he was wounded a little more, and that I think was around 44, and he was sent to the West to recuperate. So when the war ended, he was somewhere in the West. And so he was in a POW camp, I guess in an American POW camp. And then when he was let go, he, people were just wandering, especially those that had no home any longer, from the East. And he came to a town, Hagen, in Westphalia. And somehow, I don't know, they found out that he was a former policeman who was clean, who had what they called a white basket. He hadn't been involved with Nazi at all. So he was hired on the spot. he was clean. and he lived there, and later on he found my aunt, and and he had an adopted son, and they found him many years later, and they all lived until he passed away in Hagen.
To me, this is very fascinating, the fact that, you were part Jewish. And did your mother's brothers, your uncles, they know you were part Jewish?
Sure.
Wow. How was he known? And
Well, they just, you don't talk about it. You don't talk about it. You just don't, what is there to talk about? That it's just, it became, but I think at first it was just not really that much of an issue. Until 38, the Kristallnacht, or until then it was not really an issue. One person was Catholic and he was Jewish, and it was just not that much, at least in my family, because we had friends, and my mother's best friend married a Jewish man. And, it was just not that much of an issue until it was, until Hitler came in, and then they started all of that. And things in East Prussia always took a little longer than in the rest of Germany. We were up there, and things just didn't travel as fast. They didn't have the internet yet. So anyway, so it was at first, I don't think it was ever an issue until it was brought like 39, and, 38.
Now, about your family, one last question. Were you guys Lincoln?
My grandfather was,
You
yes.
were, huh?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, was that class like to fade away, or did you consider
Yeah.
yourself a Lincoln?
No.
Or
Mm-mm. No.
Those are just land owners.
Yes,
Right? You
large estate owners. Yeah, yeah,
Now, with the war coming to East Prussia,
yeah.
then your dad didn't own land. He was a parcel.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. But they still got a little money from, yeah.
And now, before the war came, that everybody got along very well.
Yeah.
What about during the war? Can you describe the relationship between all the Poles, the Jews living there?
Well, no, they were all mixed in. See, it was like it wasn't like in the United States where you had Little Italy and all of these enclaves. Everyone was mixed. It was just you knew. Well, he came. My grandmother came from Poland up, and my grandfather was Lithuanian, and so it was really no big deal. It was not that I ever realized. And my best little girlfriend, her mother was Russian, spoke with a heavy accent, but it was never came up. It was just a fact. You're Hispanic, That's what you were. So it was not really. I think all of this hatred didn't start until perhaps as the war started and the propaganda machine was really rolling.
You mentioned
Kristallnacht, yeah. I remember that the only thing I remember about it was that I was walking with my grandfather by the synagogue.
This was before, a year before.
Yeah. And I was walking with him, and it was very strange because I still remember all the glass on the floor and on the ground. And he said, "Oh, what they did," and it was strange. Something strange was going on, and I was 7, So, but I knew it was something strange. And then I remember there was a campaign that you should not shop in Jewish stores. The store owners were Jewish. You should not shop there. And this was before they were deported. And I remember my aunt had a very sweet friend, which we called Aunt Rose. And she was very proper, always very prim and proper old maid. And one day I heard her talk told that she had gone to Mr. Löwensohn, which was the jeweler. And when she came out, the Hitler Youth would stand in front and take pictures of the people that would shop in a Jewish store. And then they would put the pictures at the city hall. These people have shopped in Jewish stores. And she said that, I still remember that because it was so striking, this proper little lady, that when she walked out, the Hitler Youth were standing there with their boxes. They had the box cameras, or 1 or 2 were standing there. And she walked out, and she turned around. Mr. Löwensohn opened the door, and she turned around, and she shoved her hand out and kind of lifted up her skirt and backed against the Hitler Youth and hit him, and his box rolled in a gutter. That's, she told us that. And so I was so impressed that Tante Rose here, who was so proper in my mind. I don't know how it really happened, but this was in my mind, how she said that he opened the door for her, and she lifted up her, stuck out her ear, and then hit the youth with his camera. So, but then, you couldn't go back, and they were all deported. And then my aunt had a very dear friend who had like a dry goods store, with all sorts of things. His name was Mr. Brinitzer. And Herr Brinitzer, he was very nice to me. They would take me out, And one day she was talking, and she said that Mr. Brinitzer had died. And she said he had written a note that he would never leave his home alive, and he had opened the gas and had killed himself. And so that was very sad. But these were little snippets that I picked up. And one day I know I was walking down the street, and there was this woman coming, a little woman, and she had a rather tall son. Well, he was probably 15 or 16. And they had the Jewish star on their clothing, and it was really strange feeling, because before that it was very strange. And then in school too, one morning, Fräulein Kumro, she took roll call every morning. She said your name, and you said here. And so two of the girls weren't there, and we said, well, so and so isn't here. And she says, no, they won't be back. And we said, oh, why? And she said, they're Jewish. So that was all. So that was that. These little things stuck in my mind, because I was, they were impressionable age. They stuck with me. So I don't know if I don't know how the adults reacted. I know in my family it wasn't, things weren't talked about much, but things were understood, And I never talked outside.
Now, one of your teachers in the youth group were openly anti-Jewish, were they?
No. Oh, you couldn't be.
Anti-Jewish?
No. Oh, you mean anti-Jewish?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh.
Were there any other local political?
Oh, sure. There were groups. Yes, there were women that were very enthusiastic about this little man. But one of them, Frau Kühn, she was so, she was a widow, and my mother said, she was always trying to get my mother into the youth, the women's group, the women's national socialist group, whatever it was. And my mother would have nothing to do with it, but she couldn't speak, she always said she was too busy. And but Frau Kühn was rather tragic. She had a son and a daughter. She had a beautiful daughter, and the daughter was killed in a bombing in Tilsit still, and the son fell, in the war. We call it. He fell. If fell, then he was a soldier. Anyway, he fell, and the daughter was killed, and we were sitting just before we left in this bunker, and I remember her sitting, just sort of hunched over, and she never said anything at all. And she just sat there, and then in the morning we went out. That was the last time I saw her. And there was nothing like that enthusiastic woman that would march ahead of the class. And that just sticks in your mind. 60 years later. Just did zero. Just hunched. Oh.